Hi guys, it's Miss Backus. Today we're going to be focusing on the customary measurements for distance. Our goal in this video is that you're able to use benchmarks to either estimate a distance or to choose the best customary unit to measure it with. We're going to start by talking about some benchmark units. These are some ways of remembering about how long the different units are. The first unit we're going to be talking about as a customary unit for measuring distance, which is also sometimes called a linear measurement, is an inch. When we talk about an inch, I want you to think about your thumb. From the tip of your thumb to the base is about 1 inch. Remember, when we're talking about these benchmarks that will help you to estimate or choose, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's thumb is exactly an inch, but everyone's thumb is about 1 inch long. When we're talking about feet, this is going to come as no surprise, but an adult's foot is about 1 foot long. Another way of measuring that is to look at your forearm. So look from your elbow to your knuckles. The distance between your elbows and your knuckles is about 1 foot. Now that's for an adult. For a child, it might be a little bit longer, so you might want to extend your fingers. But think about 1 foot is about the distance from your elbow to the tips of your fingers. Yards are about the same distance as if you were to stick out one of your arms and leave the other one flat against your side. From the tips of your finger across your body to your opposite shoulder is about 1 yard. When we talk about miles, you're probably thinking about laps that you've run in gym class or even travels with your family in your car. A mile on a track is 4 laps around the track to make 1 mile. So imagine running 4 times around the track outside, and that will show you about what 1 mile is. Another way to think about the distance of a mile is to think about the distance that it would take you to go from McCarter Elementary School to the Trampo Laser Park. That's about 1 mile. I want you to keep the benchmark units that we just talked about, inches, feet, yards, and miles, in mind, because we're going to talk now about which of those units would make the most sense to measure different things. Which unit do you think you would use to measure the length of the classroom? Go ahead and pause the video while you think about your response and discuss it. If I was going to measure the length of the classroom, it certainly wouldn't make sense to use inches. Inches are just too small, and I would have to measure and measure and measure and measure. Feet are much bigger than inches, but I would still end up in the same situation. I'd have to be measuring over and over and over again with my measuring tool. Yards make much more sense for measuring the length of the classroom because they're much bigger than feet, but they're not as large as a mile. Remember, we said a mile is what you're measuring when you get in a car, and there's definitely no way that you're going to be able to drive a whole car across the classroom. Which unit would you use to measure the distance between McCarter and the movie theater? Go ahead and pause your video while you think about and discuss your response. If we think about the distance of an inch being about the size of your thumb, imagine laying your thumb down over and over and over again to go all the way from our school to the movie theater. It's just not a very reasonable way of doing things. Same thing with feet. If you were to take 1 foot and line it up after another all the way from the school to the movie theater, it would be an unreasonable way or an inefficient way to measure that distance. Yards are definitely larger than feet, but still, think about how long it takes you to go from our school to the movie theater. It makes most sense to measure the distance between those two places using miles. Pretty much anytime you're getting in your car, you're probably going to be measuring in miles. Which unit would you use to measure a crayon? Go ahead and pause the video while you think about and discuss your answer. So think about the size of a brand new beginning of the school year crayon. You absolutely could not measure that in miles. If we're talking about miles being something that you drive, you're not driving from one end to the next of a crayon. Yards are also, remember, from the tips of your finger across to your opposite shoulder. Think about how many crayons you could lay from one side of your body to the next. It wouldn't make any sense to measure a crayon in yards. Think again, we talked about yards as being, or feet as either being about the size of an adult foot or the distance between your knuckles and your elbow. You could lay several crayons in that space, so it wouldn't make sense to measure a crayon in a foot. It would, however, make sense to measure a crayon in inches. A crayon is definitely more than 1 thumb length, but less than 12. So something that we're going to be getting into more in our next video is how customary units of distance are related. When we're talking about a foot, we're talking about 12 inches. If you were to take your thumb and lay it out 12 times, that would be about the size of 1 foot. When we're talking about yards, yards are the same distance as 3 feet. So if you were to take your foot or the distance between your elbow and your knuckles and multiply that 3 times, that equals about 1 yard. There are 5,280 feet in a mile. So if you were to take your feet and walk them toe to heel, toe to heel, toe to heel, 5,280 times, that would equal a mile. We're going to be getting more into how the customary units are related and the ways that we can convert or change between the two in a later video. Let's go ahead and get some practice now with choosing the right unit to measure with.